Hello, my name is Paul Martell. I'm the Education Services Manager at Actifio. And on behalf of Actifio's Masterclass webinar series, I'd like to invite you to today's session on SARG reports, the simple Actifio report generator. Just a few short notes before we begin. Please feel free to ask us questions via the question tool on your screen. These questions will be answered as the webinar proceeds, and some of them will actually be answered on air. After the webinar, you will be offered a chance to take a short survey. Please take the time to answer the 5 simple questions. We value the input that you can provide us for this and future webinars. Also, just to let you know, our next customer webinar is Sky Appliance and Storage Tuning, which will be held on March 14th during the same time frame. We also have a live remote Sky administration class coming up on March 12th to the 16th. Today's presenter is David Fowler. He is the Manager of Global Enablement, and like I said, he'll be taking you through the lessons today. I'll be sitting in the background managing the questions queue and managing the responses. Just so you know, if there's a question that comes up, we don't answer it immediately because we want to save some of them for the Q&A session that will be at the end of the topic. But again, please take the time. If you have a question, type that in, and you'll probably see an answer for it very quickly. With that, I'm going to once again introduce David Fowler.
Thank you, Paul. And thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning for our presentation of Actifio SARG reports. Now, SARG is an acronym. It stands for the Simple Actifio Report Generator. Now, the command combines some Actifio CLI commands as well as some database query scripts that are invoked by these single word commands. And all of these commands are accessible to anyone with CLI access, as they only require administrator level permissions. So SARG reports are real-time queries to the Actifio database. Now, a lot of us get the information for our CDS or Sky appliance by either looking at the report manager or looking at the dashboard. Now, as you may know, the report manager polls daily at 3 a.m. So if you ran a job right now, you're not going to know really the metrics and statistics around it until tomorrow morning. Now, these reports will give you a real-time look to include, if you're in the middle of the job, exactly what's going on. There's over 60 scripted reports that have all these canned database queries mixed with some of the Actifio UDS and SVC info or task commands. And every single SARG command has a list of parameters that you can use to sort or otherwise manipulate the output of the command. Now here in orange, you'll see I've got a quick example. You see this fairly long database query here, the SQL query up top. Now, kind of the purpose of this is you would not be able to run this query as you have admin rights, not root, and you would need root access to run database queries. So we've kind of worked around it using these commands, and we make these commands available at the admin level. However, they do have root level functionality. So as you can see, this rather long database query becomes a single command. Report images -A for the app ID -D1. We'll get into the parameters a little bit later, but just to show you how much it simplifies some of these queries. And again, this is going to talk to the CDS right now and tell you exactly what's going on at this moment. No more waiting until 3 a.m. to figure out what happened. Now, there are some universal parameters that are applicable across all SARG commands. These are 3 that I thought were probably the most important. Now, the first one is -A, and then you've got to put a number. That's going to be your app ID. If you're protecting 1,200 apps, you don't necessarily want to see information on all 1,200 of them. This is how you would filter that down. There's 2 ways to get the app ID for this. The first is going to be to run UDS info ls application from your Actifio command line. Now, that's going to output every application that we know about and its app ID, which will be between a 4, 6, maybe 7-digit number, depending on how many apps you have protected in your whole environment. The other way, probably a bit more easier if you're just looking for a specific app, is you go into the UI, you go into the left-hand pane under the Apps tab, and you hover the mouse over it. When you hover the mouse, you'll see that same 4, 5, 6, 7-digit number. Just note that number, and that's the number that you would use here to filter by that specific application. This next one, I personally think is the most important. We'll get more into its use later, and that's just -C. that outputs the information in CSV format. This will become more important when we talk about how to get this information off the Actifio onto your local desktop. All of these SARG reports default to 48 hours, with the exception of reports that basically call it out, like report daily. Report daily does 1 day, it's built into the name. However, all of these reports, whether they default to 48 hours or 24, have the -D parameter. So you could do a -D7 for the last 7 days. And I believe that maxes out at 90. 90 days is as much as we can look back using these reports. Now, as I said, there are actually just over 60 SARG commands. I'm not going to cover them all in detail today. They're all very well documented. What we're going to get into today is more how to get that information onto your local desktop so it's more useful to you, and what commands you might use in certain use cases for everything from just monitoring to see how things are going, doing some forecasting in case you have some growth planned, or even some troubleshooting if you're running into some issues. So probably the most accessible way is going to be through your portal account. If you click the Learn link at the top right, and then back to the middle, once that new page loads, you will see our documentation library. And on the right-hand side, as an example, it's for those of you who are familiar with Unix, this document is put together like a collection of man pages. It's meant to have that kind of familiar format for those Linux, Unix, and some PowerShell users out there. The second place we can go is the knowledge base. You will find the SARG PDF attached to an article there, so you can either view it online or you can download it. And the last place, if you're not around your CDS or near your cluster, you can just go to docs.actifio.com and you can pull up your SARG document there. Now, here's a little tip for you. Even if you're running one of our 6x or 7x branches of code, I'm going to suggest that you download the SARG guide for version 8. There will be some commands in the version 8 SARG guide that you may not have on 6.0. However, the documentation of the commands, their parameters, and the examples in the version 8 SARG doc is leaps and bounds better than the previous SARG docs. So even if you're on 7.1, grab the 8.0 SARG doc. It's much more comprehensive. Now, if you are on your cluster, the inverse of the situation we just had, you're on your cluster, maybe you don't have access to the internet. Maybe your data center can't get out to the internet, and you just need a quick summary, what reports do I have? And real quickly, what do? You can run the command report list. And this is a SARG command that tells you about all the other SARG commands. And as you can see here, it's a very high-level summary, report 2 days of canceled jobs for the report canceled jobs command. And that'll give you a quick list of everything that's there. And for every SARG command, if you use the command --H, you will get the online man page, which matches pretty well word for word what we have in our document. Now, why would you use these SARG reports? As I mentioned, there are over 60 of them, and you may not need them all. However, we found that many of our customers have very specific use cases, and generally there are a couple commands to help everybody. So for your host and app monitoring, we've got report apps that will tell you about every single application we have discovered. Report connectors is a great one. It tells you about every host that has a connector on it. It tells you the version of that connector, and it will also tell you if that connector needs to be upgraded. Report connector options, also very useful. So all those hosts that returned in the previous command, report connectors, if you have any special permissions set, so if you were to go into the UI, into the advanced connector options, and you set something there, report connector options will report that back to you. So if you were using we'll say an ignore CBT switch to stop an incremental and force a full, or maybe somebody in your organization did that, we can run a report connector options and we can see that no CBT option. Perhaps somebody set it and forgot it was there. Now you've been running fulls for a month and you're not sure why. Report connector options will tell you about any of the advanced settings that have been set in the connector window. Report groups is just that. We'll tell you about all the groups and consistency groups. Now, one caveat for that was we do talk about some SLA information. Now, if you have an application that is in a consistency group, you will find that it does not have an SLT assigned to it. And that is because at that level, the apps don't get SLTs, the consistency group does. So if you run that command and the output looks a little weird, you're not seeing any sort of policy applied to the apps. It's because the policy in this case is applied at the consistency group level. Now the next two are fairly interesting. Now report org usage. So as you may know, we have the concept of organizations within the Actifio. So if you have created a resource profile, made a certain amount of disk and VMware space or Hyper-V space available to a specific department in your company, you could assign them a role. And then using report org usage, you can actually see how much MDL that organization is using. Now this is good for budgeting your environment, for forecasting. If you happen to have an Actifio and you are perhaps leasing out some of that space, or you're providing a service where you are serving that person's data to them, you could also use report org usage to see exactly how much data your client is consuming. You can see how much bandwidth they're using for replication. So if you're running a managed service plan, or anything of that kind of business model, this could be very, very helpful in kind of auditing what the people who are part of that organization that represents your customer group are doing. So appliance monitoring. This is a little bit more high level. This is more, let's look at what the CDS is doing. We're not going to look at apps or hosts or jobs, but report disables. If things aren't working, and you expect them to, this is a good first place to check. So if you are running out of vDisks, you didn't notice any expirations have been happening, you can run report disables. It will tell you, hey, expiration has been disabled on these applications or on this entire cluster. It will also let you know if your scheduler has been shut off. So if you are doing a storage upgrade or any sort of planned maintenance where you've put your schedule on pause or stopped it to prevent any jobs running during your maintenance window, it's easy to forget those sorts of things. We can run report disables just at the end, just as a sanity check to make sure that that scheduler is not listed as a disabled or offline state. Report net, very straightforward. It tells you how much traffic is moving through each interface. Report pools, one of my favorites. This tells you about all of the pools in your CDS. Now, this gets a little more interesting because it'll also tell you about pool growth over 3, 7, 90 days. And if you need more granular data than that, we can do a report pool history. And that will actually show you a day-by-day report on what consumption level you were at in that pool. Now we'll hop over to job monitoring. We can look at any sort of job the Actifio does just using these reports. We can report running jobs. That will tell you about every job that's running or queued, what percentage it's in. If it's a remote job, we sometimes break those into sub-jobs to send smaller size bytes across the wire. This will break it down into all your sub-jobs and let you know the specific percentage of completion for every single job that you've got running, even ones that aren't showing in the UI. Expirations are a good example. We don't necessarily show expirations in the UI because they're so quick. However, sometimes an expiration will get queued. And so if you are expecting some vDisks in your snap pool to expire, we can take a look at report running jobs and see if we have any expiration jobs sitting in queued status. Report dedupes, exactly what it sounds like, tells you about all the data that got deduped in the last 48 hours. Again, we can use a -D1 for 1 day, -D3 for 3 days. Report failed jobs, always a good one to take a look at. And these are all 48 hours by default. Report jobs kind of sounds like report running jobs. Report jobs only actually tells you about jobs that have completed. So you won't get any of your in progress jobs with that. You're gonna need report running jobs. Report remote dedupes, exactly the same as report dedupes, just talking about sending data to the remote cluster. Report snaps, just what it sounds like. Report daily, that's probably, if you just want a holistic look at all of your jobs, report daily is the way to go. And I'm actually gonna dive into that report a little bit more later, so we'll move on from here. All right, so as you can see, I've got some stuff highlighted in orange. This is a very text-heavy presentation. So for our host and app monitoring, I've picked a couple of our use case type SARG commands, and we're gonna get a little bit deeper into a lot of them, and then we're gonna get a lot deeper into 2 of them. And we're also going to talk about how to do all this stuff remotely so you can do it from your desktop where it really is more valuable to you. So we'll start with report apps. Again, this lists all the applications. Now this also lists any app, even if it's not protected, that is consuming resources. So if you had an app and you took it out of protection, however, it's still maybe using a vDisk, or it's still got dedup there, it will still show up in report apps because it is consuming resources. Report unprotected will obviously just show everything that doesn't have a policy against it. Now these are, if you discover your entire vSphere environment, and we'll keep the numbers around, we'll say we found 10 VMs, we protected 8, and the last 2, we know about them, but we haven't done anything with them, so they don't have a footprint on disk, other than an entry in the database to let us know that they exist. That's really all that's there. Those are gonna come up under the report unprotected. Now, all of these commands are queries. You can't break anything with them, so feel free to just go through and run them. The one that I will warn you about is there is a SARG report called report everything. If your CDS is busy, it's not going to cause a problem for your production environment, because we will essentially queue this request as one of the lowest priority things that's going on in the box. However, report everything will tell you about every single application we know about on that CDS, so it can take a while to return. If you need the output from that, I would run it about 15 minutes before you actually need the output. Moving on to report org members. This is the one I just brought up regarding some of your MSP type models. Couple of interesting parameters for this. If you've onboarded a bunch of applications for a client and you want to make sure that you've got all their applications into that org so you can traffic it properly, we can report org members -u. And that will tell you about any applications that we find that are not part of an organization. And just as a sanity check, we can go and check it from the other side, and we can run a report org members -m. And what that will do is that will tell you about any application that is covered under multiple orgs. Now, there are good use cases for that. You may have intended to do that. However, you can run this check if generally you're only going to find one app copy per organization. So we can kind of sanity check it using the -m switch. And if you really want to kind of get very thorough and make sure that all of your orgs are listed, we unfortunately don't have a SARG command for that, but you can use the UDS info ls org, and that will tell you about all of the organizations. And then the next step is report org usage. This is how, once we've used report org members and we've done our auditing, we've made sure all of our apps are in the right organizations, we've made sure we don't have any that are in there twice, and we make sure we don't have any that are in multiple orgs unless that's what we intended. We can now start to use report org usage. Now, if you need a real-time right now, you're going to want to use the -z parameter. This is a SARG report that does wait until 3 a.m., just like the report manager. However, that -z will allow you to force update right away. Now, in the output of that, you're going to get the app quantity. So we just talked about, we discovered 10, we protected 8. We should see 8 under app quantity. MDL usage, this is one of those important ones for your MSP model. We'll tell you how much disk they're using. vDisks, as we know, we can't kind of cordon out vDisks by organization. We have one pool that's shared across every organization that's in that CDS. So if we have 4 clients using it and one client happens to be using 1,200, we've got an 1,850 limit before we start sending warnings. This will allow you to tell who's using what application is using it, so you can contact them to either up their service plan or let them know that they need to start consuming a bit less. Now, snap pool usage, self-explanatory. How many gigabytes, terabytes of the snap pool are they using? And then the post compress. Now, this is once the data has been written to the dedup pool, it's been dedup and compressed. This will tell you how much space on disk that deduplicated image is taking in the dedup pool, which is going to be vastly different from the logical size. So the logical size will be the undeduped size. And you'll see that metric in the lower right-hand corner of your UI. What we really care about is post-compressed size. That's how much, how many physical platters, how much actual physical storage is it consuming? Now for job monitoring, as I mentioned, report running jobs gives everything to include queue jobs right down to the subjobs and their completion percentage. Report snaps, just like it sounds, report dedupes. I bring this one up again because there's a one that I like, and that's report dedupe ratio. And that will tell you what your total dedupe ratio is for that dedupe pool. Now it's going to give you the post-compressed data, which we just talked about, which is total size on disk. And that should match up with the consumption level you see in the output of report pools for your dedupe pool. But more importantly, what it's got is your logical data. Now, why do we care about the logical data? Well, if a meteor fell on your unmanned data center out in the middle of nowhere and nobody got hurt, everybody's great, but your data center's gone and we need to get the data back. That logical data is going to represent how much disk space you are going to need to fully rehydrate all of the data in your dedupe pool. So if you have a logical data size of 2 petabytes, but you only have 1.5 petabyte worth of disk to restore to, you're going to need to be a little selective or add more storage. So this is great for DR planning. If you ever did want to make sure and inspect that you had enough to do your restores either locally or from remote, you can use that report dedupe ratio command to see the total logical size, which will guide you in how much storage you're going to need to fully rehydrate that data. Now, report daily. Now this is the daily status. This is only 24 hours. This is not the default 48 like normal. It's going to show all of the successful jobs of every job class. Now, it's not going to give you a list, snapshot, 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 dedupe, 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 but it'll say, snapshot, 15 jobs, dedupe, 15 jobs, remote dedupe, 8 jobs, 7 in progress. It'll also give you the consistency date of the last replicated image, which is nice for things like database backups, log truncation with roll forward, roll back capability. It'll let you know what the last date of logging was in the snap pool before it went to dedupe, so you know what range you have available to you for roll forward, roll back before you need to start recovering your logs from the dedupe pool and reattaching them to your database instance. Now, in the report daily, applications that are in consistency groups are not listed. So again, at this level, we have replaced the notion of the application object with the notion of the parent object, and that parent object is the consistency group. So all those app objects become subordinate to that major object, which is the consistency group. So that's really where we're going to run all of our metrics, is against that CG. Now we're going to use consistency groups to do things like reduce vdisk count, capture entire clusters or entire banks of clusters as one consistent group. So if we did have a DR situation, all of those instances are going to recover to the same point in time. You don't have one that recovers till 1 a.m., one that recovers at noon. They'll all be right back to the exact same time, provided that all the log truncation was set up in sync when you built the policies. If you protected them all under the same policy, under the same consistency group, when you do your recovery, everything will recover to the same point in time. Now also for job monitoring, there's 2 mount commands. There's report mounts and report mounted images. Now, if you are using more vdisks than you think you should, this is the first place I would look. I would look at report mounts or report mounted images. It's not uncommon for a consumer of your data to mount up an image and forget. They mount up just like network drives. If you go into Windows Virtual Device Management, you can see it, it's a drive, you can give it a drive letter, and it just works. So we tend to forget that we've got a mount running. Unfortunately, that mount is going to consume at least 1 vdisk. And if we run mount after mount after mount and there's no cleanup, you could find that your vdisk consumption is well higher than you expected it to be. This is a great first place to look. Appliance monitoring. Now I spoke about report disables earlier. I put an example of the output here on the screen because sometimes the output can be misleading. Now, if you look at this little black terminal output I've got here, we'll see we've got the same app name is listed twice. And that's because this command looks for things in a certain order. It will go through and it will list every application whose expiration is shut off. And then it will list every application whose scheduler is shut off. And then every application whose app consistency is disabled. So as you can see in this case, our app endband DB had both the expiration off and the scheduler off, so it shows up twice. And we can verify that it's the same one. We've got the same host name, same app name, more importantly, the same application ID. The other neat thing is you see that date and time column, that will actually tell you when it was disabled. So if you're trying to track down, how long has this not been running? Do we need to do any cleanup? We can go in here and we can look to see exactly when it was shut off. Now, report FC tree. This report is a bit of a bear. However, if you can come to understand it, you will probably never have another question about vDisks ever. This basically, it shows the snapshot tree. And by that, I mean it shows all of your vDisks, AKA staging disks. It also describes the parent-child relationship. So you'll have your golden copy. That will be on one vDisk or one staging disk. And then we will visually in the report show the staging disks that are children of that parent disk. So that parent disk is your golden copy, and all those child vDisks are going to be your incrementals. So generally, you're only going to have one. However, there are some use cases where you may have multiple staging disks that are attached to different kind of protection profiles for that application or host. So generally, you will see one parent, one child. But if you see one parent and then 3 or 4 children, that just means that we are backing that up under multiple policies. If that's your intent, great. However, if you only intend to protect everything once, looking for those multiple children is a pretty good way. It's not absolute, but it's a pretty good way to tip yourself off that you do have some double protection going on. That is the same exact app or host protected twice under the same policy. So sometimes you will protect your SQL instance on its own, and then you'll also protect it as part of a consistency group. So now maybe you didn't intend to protect it twice, but you are. This will help you find that. You can also pipe this out to WC or word count to get a count of lines, and that will give you every single line that we're using in one line equals one vDisk. So if your output is 1810, then you're using 1810 vDisks. At the bottom, we've got report pools. Again, this is one of my favorites because it shows pool growth. And if we notice that things are spiking, we can generally get in there ahead of time to prevent an overconsumption issue. Now, when you look at this, you're going to see something that you will have not seen in your UI. You will see a reservation of space in the dedup pool. Now, we keep 15% of the allocated storage for the dedup pool held aside. The major reason is, we all know what happens when you fill a file system. It stops working. The last thing you want your dedup system to do is to stop working. When you need dedup data, it generally means either a mistake has been made or we're doing some IOQ testing. But when you need your dedup data, you need it now. And if that pool is 100% full, you're not going to get it. I won't get into the minutia. However, if you do fill up and you've got that 15% reserve in place, reach out to support. We can help you out. We can generally free a little bit up for you so that you can get that mount, get that restore, finish your GC and sweep to clear that space back. But that is certainly a support-only action. And we won't be getting too much more into that today. The take-home is if you do run afoul of the dedup pool and you do find yourself at 100% and that reservation is still at 15%, give us a call. We can make a quick adjustment. We can get you out of trouble, and then we need to take that 15% back to make sure that that pool stays healthy. You'll also notice if you are looking at a SCI, if we do take some of that reserve, you'll notice the memory consumption goes up. So this can be dangerous. If this is pushed too far, we can cause the machine to go out of memory or And when a SCI incident goes it reboots. The last thing you want for a production data service appliance to do is to reboot when you don't expect it. So even if you get in on the hypervisor end and you can kind of find a way to manipulate that number, please don't. The last thing we want is to see your SCI go into a cyclic reboot. All right, so system health. These next two, this one specifically, this is just for the CDS, and it goes through all of the physical hardware resources. I'm not going to go through all of them. You can see them all here on the screen, and again, it's very well documented in the manual. Some important things for output from here though, more use case kind of troubleshooting based stuff. If you're having really, really terrible performance, you know, your remote dedupes are taking forever, it seems like they're just not moving down the pipe, we can take a look at FCMB and FCIO. Now it's going to be your fiber channel statistics. If you've got 4 12 gigabyte bonded fiber cards in your SAN, but you're only seeing 200 megs, that tells us, you know, there's a bottleneck somewhere. Now where are we going to find that? Generally, when we hit a bottleneck, it's disk. Not that networks are never slow, but generally if a network is slow, that's easy enough to tell. We can rule that out in the first 5 minutes. Disk can be a little bit more complicated. We really need to dig into the system and start looking at some metrics. For a quick high level, just looking for clues, you know, where should I start to investigate some of these performance issues? The MDMB, you'll see that it's number 5 or 6 from the bottom. That's MDisk throughput in megabits per second. Now your MDisks are the closest representation we have to the actual physical platters. So if we've got our 4 bonded 12 gig fiber channel connections, there's nothing else going on in the network, but we see that our MDMB or our MDisk throughput is megabytes per second. You know, 2, 3, 5, 10, we've got a disk issue. It could be the controller's under contention. It could be that the disks are spread out in a clustered array, and now we've got to talk through interconnects. But the take home is, you know, we can look at all these other metrics. Fiber channel, that looks good. Metrics there look good. VDisks for everything on a mounted host where it's using the local network, that all looks good. So why is everything so bad? Okay, well, our MDisk throughput is terrible. So while it's not going to really point a finger at an exact disk, that will give you a good inclination of where you can start to look. And if you do have to open up a support case for some help with some performance, if you could grab some of these outputs and put it in the case, it will help the person who takes your case from our support department kind of get to the root of the problem quicker. If you're just lost and you don't know, absolutely just open the case. You don't need to put much information in there. Just let us know what cluster it is, who you are, and what the best way to get in touch with you is. However, some of these SARG commands, they're pretty low effort, and they can help the CSE kind of get to the root of the problem quicker, getting your problem resolved faster. Now, report health. This one, anytime you get an upgrade, this is one of the first things that we do. I've got a full page of parameters here that gets checked. This is not all of them. I just put this up kind of as a sample. This is the kind of the all-inclusive, is my CDS or Sky instance operationally ready? So we're going to check to make sure that we can talk over all the ports that we need to talk on. We're going to do a version check to make sure it hears us and answers back appropriately. It'll tell you about every single job that's running. It'll tell you about schedulers. It'll tell you about expirations. It'll even warn you if you have a long-running job, which I think is really neat. So if you have a job that generally completes in 2 hours, this will tell you if that's running 4, 5, 6 hours. Generally good to, you know, if you did have a maintenance engagement planned, you could run this, make sure everything is running as you expect it to. If you do find 1 or 2 long-running jobs, then you can make a better informed decision about when you want to open that maintenance window, or maybe even cancel the job if it's not something that's needed. Now we're going to get into what we've kind of done a high level on what I consider some of the more important commands. Again, there's over 60. We've got a well over 100-page document. I didn't really want to do a doc review with you guys. I wanted to give you some more use case stuff that you could take with you, and then leverage that manual along with what we talk about today to get a little more value out of this. So all of these commands, as I mentioned at the beginning, they're all accessible to anybody with admin level access, and that is to say anybody who has CLI access with read-write into the CDS or Sky. And we can make these commands remotely using SSH, using Plink, PowerShell. And here's the format here in the output that you would see. So from your local desktop, we can just SSH, we do our normal key thing, admin add IP, and then we wrap our SARG command in quotes, report connectors, and this is the output we would get. As we can see, is it physical or virtual? What's the name? What's the operating system on it? IP addresses are great to have. And the last 3 columns are really the take home here. That's what version is installed, what is the highest available version, and if we check it, do we think it needs to be upgraded? Now, as you can see in this example, we've got a mix here just to kind of show both dispositions. Now, when we pull the data down remotely, sometimes, I mean, if we did do a report apps and we're protecting 1,100 apps, we don't necessarily want to see 1,100 apps spam out onto our screen. This is where we get back to that -C, -Charlie parameter I pointed out at the beginning. This is why this is one of my favorites, is we can actually, as you can see here in my example, we've got report connectors -C for a CSV, and then we redirected the output, and this works in PowerShell too with the right syntax, to list.csv. So maybe you don't want all that output to just spam out onto your terminal. Maybe you want to capture that in a file and then feed it into Excel, SQL, Oracle, Google Sheets, what have you. All of these reports are built to import cleanly into all of these platforms. So really, seeing it on the screen is kind of informative. You can see what's going on. But if you really want to do some in-depth analysis and metrics, then we're going to want to get it into something like Excel or Google Sheets or SQL and start running our own queries and our own pattern matching against it. Now, what this opens up is it opens up the full command set of your terminal, depending on your OS. So it's, like I said, it's going to be, any of your GNU-based terminals, PowerShell, not GNU-based, but iTerm, any of your standard installed Linux, Unix terminals. If you're running Windows 10, the native terminal that comes attached with Ubuntu also works here. So what this opens up is it allows you to do things like pipe, grep, awk. So in our example of report connectors, maybe I don't want to see everything. Maybe I don't care about the IP address. I just want a list of all of my connectors and whether or not they need to be upgraded. And you know what? I don't even want to know about the ones that don't need anything. I just want a list of things that need to be upgraded. So we can use the same remote call, report connectors, and you could obviously build your own pipe, grep, awk, print 297. That will give you the host name, the highest available connector, and if we've determined it needs to be upgraded, it'll just output those 3 columns that you really care about. And again, we can then redirect this output to a list.csv, connector list.csv, whatever you choose. And we're going to build on this a bit more. I am going to send everybody who's attending today this slide deck so you can actually copy and paste these script examples. However, we do see environments where we're looking at 20, 30, 50 Actifio appliances. Now, to poll all 50 of those, to run report connectors, to check all of your connectors, that would take the better part of your day. However, since we're now working remotely and we're sending all of our queries from our local desktop, we're not locked down under permissions anymore. So we can create 2 quick files, and we can actually run a loop to go out and query every single CDS in our environment with 1 command. So you're going to create your first file, and that's going to be a pick list, and that's going to contain the IP address. And that'll be the IP address that you are using to log in via the UI of every single CDS that you want to pull. And then in a second file, you're going to put your script. Now, it doesn't have to be a for loop. I happen to like for loops. You could use a do while. You could use a manual incrementing loop. This isn't here to tell you how to write a loop. It's just here to demonstrate that you could use something like this, even if you only had 10 and you just wanted to know about every snapshot that happened in all 10 right now. You don't want to wait for the 3 o'clock poll for Report Manager to get your great SLA violations list. You can use a loop like this to get a moment in time right now, look at everything that's going on. Now, the one caveat, quick reminder, if you were going to run the report daily command in a loop like this, you're going to want to include the -Z parameter for a force update. And you may actually even at that point want to add a little bit of a weight to your script to allow that output to be generated. I personally like to use some echoes, so I know I'm generally not looking for just connectors. I'm going to look for dedupes, remote dedupes. I also want to know about your pool history, and I want to know about your GC and sweeps. So I'll generally start to sandwich a lot of these together, and you don't have to do 1 command. You can just start stringing them together. Just each need to have their own SSH call. So again, this example, we have SSH, then we do the report connectors. You can't report connectors, report daily, report pools. You would need SSH, report connectors, new line. SSH report snaps, new line, SSH report pools. And again, I know this was a very text-heavy presentation today. My intent was really just to kind of get you familiar with the material, show you where you can find the detailed information. And again, I will give you the slide deck so you'll get my examples. And hopefully I've inspired you to find some interesting and new ways to use these that may bring some additional value to you. And for everybody who's attending today, you will receive this video right afterwards. If you've missed any of our previous webinars, all the way back to the beginning, you can go to our YouTube channel, and that's YouTube Actifio Enablement Team. Every webinar we've done, our SLA planning, report manager, capacity planning, job log parsing, and then this will be up there, generally in the same form that you're seeing it right now. We do clean up the audio a little bit and take out my stumbling. But yeah, you'll get this copy right now, and you'll get the finished copy about a week from now. So I wanted to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon for our presentation on SARG reports. Just a reminder, our next webinar is going to be in 2 weeks, and that will be Sky and Sky Storage Administration and Tuning, which coincides very well with our Sky Administration class also being performed that week. And if you are interested in both, it just so happens to work out that you can attend the class, and you could also attend the webinar without interfering with your class schedule. Thanks again, everybody, for coming. Paul, I'll give it back to you.
Yep, Dave, I want to thank you as well from on behalf of the participants. The question queue is all set. We don't have any real questions other than what you've already answered on air. And you can always send information to us after the fact. The easiest way to do that would be to send something to enablement@actifio.com. Once again, I want to thank you on behalf of the participants.
Thank you, Paul, and thanks again, everybody, for joining. That'll wrap up our webinar for today. We'll catch you all next time. Thank you for joining us for another YouTube Tech Tip video. If you like the content you're seeing on this channel, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you will be alerted to any future content.